breathtaking British Columbia, vast and wide, stretching from the majestic Rocky Mountains to the wilds of the Pacific coast. Vibrant cityscapes are balanced by the unspoiled beauty of Canada's westernmost province, built as it was on a partnership between Aboriginal people and the venerable Hudson's Bay Company. Receiving its royal charter from King Charles II in 1670, the Hudson's Bay Company utilized a series of land-based ports or trading posts to further its trade with Aboriginal peoples and to preserve mainly British interests west of the Rockies. Having secured trading rights from Alaska and on down to the Columbia River, the Hudson's Bay Company would scout the land, put up trading posts, and buy out existing outposts from rival Northwest Company, in the process securing a monopoly in the fur trade business. This map represents a snapshot of the area prior to 1858, when the region was known as New Caledonia. Forts were established along waterways, rivers, and important routes in a strategic effort to advance trade. Various outposts were established, including Fort Kamloops in the interior, leading south to Fort Vancouver, Washington State, Fort Victoria, Fort Hope, and of course, Fort Langley. Named after Thomas Langley, a prominent Hudson's Bay Company director, the Hudson's Bay Company maintained the outpost as a trading post, supply depot, farm, and fish packing center. Contrary to popular belief, the blacksmith at Fort Langley never fashioned guns or arms, as was the case at military outposts. However, he had ample work making tools and trading with First Nations communities. The blacksmith's role was important for another reason: the scarcity of metal. The majority of it was shipped from England, taking 6 months to arrive. Metal was highly prized and never wasted. A good blacksmith was worth his weight in gold. Together with the Aboriginal people, the carpenter, the boat builder, and the cooper, the blacksmith was an integral cog in the life of the fort, which would not have survived without their services. Rebuilt in 1840, Fort Langley started the salmon packing industry BC would become famous for. The implementation of large-scale salmon exports sowed the seeds for the province's foreign commerce. BC salmon was shipped to far-off ports such as England and the Sandwich Islands, known today as Hawaii. Then in 1858, the world descended on Fort Langley's door when news reached San Francisco that gold had been discovered in the sands of the Upper Fraser River. The gold rush was on. Suddenly, a population of a few thousand exploded to 30,000 within 8 months, as Yankee prospectors poured in to seek their fortunes. The fur trade instantly took a back seat to the gold rush, as Fort Langley became the center for mining supplies. However, the gold rush was also seen as a threat to England's sovereignty. The majority of prospectors were American, and Fort Langley represented a site of strategic importance for the Yankees. The crown's stake in the New World was suddenly in jeopardy. On August 2, 1858, Chief Trader James Douglas was appointed governor, and a new colonial name would help bolster England's stake in the region.
Tomorrow, November the 19th, 1858, an amazing event is going to take place. The New Caledonia land will be given over to become the Crown Colony of British Columbia. From the Pacific Ocean to the Rocky Mountains, from the 49th parallel to Alaska, the Crown Colony of British Columbia will be born.
Thus, in an historic ceremony witnessed by 100 attendees, the name New Caledonia was abandoned, and Fort Langley became the birthplace of British Columbia. But not before a potential conflict had to be cleared up first. The chosen name Columbia was too similar to that of the South American region of the same name. It was Queen Victoria herself who attached British to the chosen name, thus creating the Crown Colony of British Columbia. However, there would be no such celebration or growth for Fort Langley. The venerable old outpost would fall into disrepair, and the big house, once a focal point of the fort, was pulled down in favor of a new residence for the post's manager. Finally, in April 1886, the Hudson's Bay Company constructed a new sales building in the nearby village and sold the fort, spelling the end of Fort Langley's proud heritage as a company post. However, were it not for the valiant efforts of a few, some of what remains today would be forever lost. Benjamin Butler Marr, village doctor to Fort Langley, can take credit for preserving much of the past.
Yes, to a large degree he was. He came into Fort Langley first about 1907, and really about 1910 he settled in Fort Langley, and he married here in Fort Langley, married the blacksmith's daughter. He lived here until war broke out in 1914, and he was away from Fort Langley from 14 till about 19. However, after the war, this fort, what was left of it was this big white storehouse building here to the left, and also a smaller building to the north of that. And across the road on the top of the hill, just about where the big house stands, he built a home there for sort of the farm hands, and the shop that managed the farm lived up there. Now, I ran the sheep in there, and Dad used to say, that's a historical building, and you get in there and dung it out, and which I would do. He interested the Parks and Monuments Board. It's Historic Sites and Monuments Boards, and the Western Director was Judge Howey, who lived in Westminster. And Judge Howey was the moving force behind the saving of this fort as a historical monument. And Dad's interest was to get the fort and land surrounding it, to get that into the public domain. In other words, to sell that to the federal government so that the government actually owned the site and the building. Dad's big concern was to get at least a 25-foot square plot of land to build a cairn on it. He wanted a cairn there to state that it was a historical building and it was part of the monuments and historic sites and monuments of the federal government. He formed the Fort Langley Improvement Society after the war. That group was quite active. They built the town hall in Langley. It's still standing and still one of the nicest old halls in the Fraser Valley. So that's about the story of his involvement in it, and I think the rest's on the record.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Everyone has a part to play in this living history. Even the youngest take great pride in their performance. Here the visitor can savor life on the land, as the original inhabitants of Fort Langley might have done.
1, 2.
Fort Langley is much more than just an historic site. Here you'll find prime recreational facilities such as boating, fishing, fine dining, and camping. A valued source for summertime fun for vacationers to residents alike. It is said that to appreciate where we are and how far we have come, one needs only to look back at the road taken to see from whence we came. Fort Langley is a treasure trove of living history, a throwback to a time when neighbors knew each other, helped one another, in a community rich in friendship. British Columbia too invites the world to our doorstep to see how we're building for the future while providing a window into our past. While the modern city of Vancouver is seen as the gateway to BC, Fort Langley serves as the gatekeeper to British Columbia's heritage. Combining the present with the past can be a delicate dance, but to the weary pioneers at the end of a long summer's day at Fort Langley, there is no sense of making history or the promise of pending legacy, just the realization of a good day's work and a good job done. And to the visitors of Fort Langley, a chance to shake hands with history, to climb inside a snapshot, and for a brief moment in time, become one with our heritage. Today, Fort Langley is yours to discover its rich history of the first visitors and immigrants to British Columbia, and how they interacted with their First Nations hosts. Costumed staff members are on site every day to help visitors make meaningful connections with this heritage. Fort Langley National Historic Site invites everyone to experience the sights and sounds of this living history of the birthplace of British Columbia.
Friends like you make the world go round, keeping spirits high, feet on